Hi guys, good afternoon. I'm going to start the debate briefing for NSDC 2021 right now. We were started earlier because the judge briefing was done earlier. Start the briefing for NSDC 2021 right now. Okay, so the objective of this debaters briefing is basically to understand NSDC rules and conduct, and also to introduce Wsdc debate format. But there's also an additional because we as an ACOR also want to introduce you the basic role of Prime Minister and Leader of Opposition. So we're going to give a briefing on how step-by-step analysis on how to be the first speaker, to create step up, and also to create arguments. The reason why we want to focus on the first speaker, because for 3-on-3 debate, it is really important to have a very strong ground as a first speaker, because that would be the entire identity of your team, and your second speaker and third speaker could operate and could deliver speech better if you guys have a better setting ground from the very beginning of the debate. Okay. Now, next, but before we just will let you know the NSDC general rules and conduct. The first one is the tournament will consist of 5 preliminary rounds and also break to octofinals. So it's for top 16 teams, and 15 top best speakers will be eligible for selection process to be a member of WSDC team 2022. And also NSDC will follow the standard of WSDC format. But the only difference is in WSDC, you have 1 hour case building time, but in NSDC, because we have a very tight schedule, the case building time is only 30 minutes. And also all debaters must all attend the 5 preliminary rounds without fail. Unless, of course, you have any other emergency or unusual circumstances, especially when you are online. Probably you have a problem with your connection, especially some areas in Indonesia do have a problem with connections and data. So just if that happens, just let one of the CAP knows about this problem, then we'll act accordingly. But the default expectations is all of you must attend the 5th preliminary round. The reason is because it's all based on the tabulations, so it wasn't really fair if you did not attend only one preliminary round, because then it will kind of mix and also make the tabulation quite problematic, because your opponent's supposed to fight against the opponents that have a similar capacity as you. But when they, let's just say we need someone to exchange you, or you guys also have an iron person, it wouldn't be fair because the capacity probably different. That's why it wouldn't be fair for your opponents and the scoring and also the result of that particular round. Okay, but we do allow iron person, but only for 1 round. If you did listen to the adjudicator briefing, you will still be eligible to break in elimination round, even if you use this iron percent regulation for 1 round. But the scoring of the team will be effective to the speech. However, the final individual scoring will be different from the scoring of your team. Okay, so the speaker who is missing in the round will be scored the lowest point in what Wsdc speaker score range. Okay, so it's actually 60 if I'm not mistaken. And then also, but only in that particular round. So in the rest of the rounds, if you do your speech, you will be scored accordingly to your speech. Okay, next, this is basically the substitution rules and how it's being done. Okay, is when one of the speakers unable to speak for whatever reason, is it internet failure or one of you guys sick? And there are two possible scenarios and reactions, okay? The first scenario is the speaker is unable to give the speech at all. And the second scenario, if the speaker speaking and drops in the middle of the speech, and it's permanently. So the adjudicators and the other speakers already wait for you for a certain amount of time, but you're still not coming in. Then you can use this substitution or iron person rule. Okay, now if a speaker drops off a call and unable to rejoin in the beginning of the speech, what the team could do is basically, first of all, the judge will allow a reasonable period of time to rejoin, approximately 5 minutes. But then another speaker from that team may deliver a speech in substitution if in 5 minutes she or he is not able to go back to the Zoom room or the Zoom breakout room. Okay. Now, but if this happened in the middle of the speech, then the team is given approximately 1 minute to decide between two options, okay? Have the unfinished speech marked as it is. This means if the speech stopped at 4 minutes, then the judge will mark the speech based on that 4-minute speech, okay? Based on the content of that 4-minute speech. Or you can decide to replace this individual and to continue the rest of this 4-minute speech that this person unable to deliver, okay? But if the team failed to make the decision within the particular time of 1 minute, then the default option is option A, okay? The reason why we only give 1 minute speech because you already deliver your speech, then basically your opponent is basically waiting to give responses to, and the dynamic of the debate is going on. That's why we won't give any more time than 1 minute. Okay, now going to the debate format we will use, which is Wsdc. But before that, let's just talk about debate at a glance, okay? So this is basically what I have always been emphasized when I give debaters briefing, is that debating is not a personal abuse or irrational attacks, or it's purely an emotional appeals. This is not only to your opponents, this is also to your judge and all members in that debating room and the tournament. This means that if you do have one argument, or you do have disagreement in whatever form, whether it is in your speech, whether you don't agree with the decisions of your adjudicators, you're not allowed to do those things mentioned on the slide. So it's not a personal abuse, it's not an irrational attacks or purely emotional appeals. So you should be polite, you should uphold the value of education and also critical thinking. So the example of this is that if, for example, you're being given a motion that this house would legalize gay marriage, if you are the opposition teams, and for example, you do have a personal belief that gay is sinful, or you don't necessarily agree with the existence of gay, you're not allowed to say that homosexuality is basically disgusting, or homosexuality, you're attacking their physical appearance, like most of them are not manly, for example, or the way they dressed is not reflecting on how straight men people should be. This is basically a personal abuse and irrational attacks. You're not allowed to do it. It's also when you're not agree with your adjudicators, you're not allowed to attack and raise your voice, and then also getting angry or say inappropriate words to your adjudicators. We need to have some respects to other debaters, other adjudicators, and other educators that involves in the competitions. Okay, so you're not allowed to do that. If you do want to critique your adjudicators, we have a forum to do that. You have a personal feedback. You can give a constructive feedback and a rational reasoning why you don't agree with the decision and why you give the adjudicator, for example, above below average score. Okay, and also some formats of debate: Asian parliamentary system, Australasian, British parliamentary system, and Wsdc system. Okay, now specifically on Wsdc parliamentary system. So it's actually an 8-minute speech for each substantive speech. It's basically first until the third speaker of opposition, and also 4 minutes of reply speech. And only first and second speakers can deliver the reply speech. And also POIs are allowed in Wsdc. This is how you can deliver your POI in Wsdc debate format. It's a short comment and a question. You can deliver your question in whatever way you feel comfortable. For example, you can deliver it into you can deliver your POI into a question that is directly attack what's the speaker's speech about at that particular moment, or you can refer back to the previous explanation that they have that you feel you need to clarify or you need to question. You can question in the form of attack or just merely clarification if you feel that it wasn't clear, that basically what is your mechanism, can you clarify that? It's also okay to have that particular POI. Or it's only a short comment, probably a little bit of illustrations why your opponent is irrelevant, the argument is irrelevant, or any other short comment that you think is necessary and can give you advantage in the debate. Okay, and also speaker who delivers speech has the right to refuse POI, but I think, but also in general, they should accept at least 2 POIs. This is basically the general rule in the Wsdc. If a speaker accepts POI, they must ensure that the person offering the POI is given an adequate time to express their comments. Okay. So it's approximately 15 seconds. If you want to do POI, you have 15 seconds to do it. And also, similarly, if a speaker's POI is rejected, they would wait until 15 seconds before they all can offer another POI. This is basically to prevent some speakers to do badgering in their POI. So don't badger in your POI. Just do it once at a time, but doesn't mean you don't also offer any POI at all. So yeah, speakers might offer POIs anytime between 1st and 7 minutes. All POIs should be done through video, audio, or text. Okay. Debaters should make clear at the beginning of their speech how they would prefer to receive POI. So before your speech, you should mention, I would accept POI by unmute yourself, for example. So all the speakers should respect this decision. You cannot do otherwise. So for example, if they want you to type on the checkbox, then type on the checkbox. If you don't feel comfortable like typing, you cannot unmute yourself and then ask the POI. It will disturb the speakers. That's why you should respect the decision of the speakers on how they want to accept the POI. Okay. Now motion. Motion is basically issue or topic that you will debate upon. It's a full proportional statement, not a question. This is basically some of example of motions, and because you already passed the provincial selection, I'm sure you are quite familiar of what motion is. Now, affirmative is defending the motion. Why generally the motion is true, or why even if it's not generally, specifically the motion is true, and why this particular actor or condition or circumstances that you want to defend is really important to be, it's really important in principle or in urgency or any timeline that you want to use in the debate, okay? But negative is basically oppose the motion and also provide negation and proper engagement to the motions. It is also not the obligation of negative to prove that generally the motions is true or generally the motion is justifiable. In most cases, negative able to only defend that in specific cases or in a minority of cases, the motion is not justifiable. That's why it should not be done. Or in certain circumstances that most likely the motion will happen, it is bad or it's not justifiable or it's not urgent. That's why the motion should not be done. Okay. Now next, also still about motion. Motion can be faced in several ways, starting with this house. Who is this house? It could be the state or the House of Representative. That's why it's this house. At the beginning is basically a parliamentary debate, which is the reflection of the parliamentary debate that happens in real parliamentary system in the government. That's why this house is the state. That's why, for example, this house would ban smoking. For this house, it's also a group of neutral actor. So you need to act as someone neutral. And why, as a neutral actor, you should defend one motion or you should oppose one motion. Now, sometimes specific actor is defined in the motion in which the case, in the case of action is being done by this actor, not an abstract state of society in general. So it's basically specific the actor that's being talked about in the motion. Not necessarily an actor motions, but it looks like this house believes that schools should permanently expel bullies. So it looks like this, okay? So it's really clear that the actor that being defined is clear that it is basically school. But you still need to access it as a neutral actors. But it's just specific that the school should do it. Unless the motion say that the school, as school, then you should permanently expel bullies. Then it is only the interest of the school. But when the motion say that this house believes that schools should permanently expel bullies, this house believes that this house refers to school, but you still need to access it as the third speaker's perspective, or not third speakers, third person perspective, okay? And then also, or yeah, you can read the motion, this house believes that democratic nation. So it's really specific, which is this house, which this house refers to. It is basically a democratic nations, okay? Info slide. This is basically an information slide. What I just want to emphasize is this. It is assumed to be true for the debate. Whatever the info slide says so, it is assumed to be true on the debate. So there's no other way around, okay? If you want to prove otherwise, for example, in the motions, Siti is basically a feminist. And Siti doesn't have a job right now because it's pandemic and it's really difficult. And then she got an offer from a company that she knows is having and upholding patriarchal value. Okay. Now the debate, the motion says that this house as Siti would accept the offer of the company. Now, assumed to be true, you need to assume that Siti is a feminist. She is a feminist. You cannot prove otherwise. You cannot say, no, Siti is basically a patriarchal. But even if you have another analysis or another characterization of what it said that is different from what it said from the inflow side, in certain actor or certain circumstances, you need to give proper explanation why most likely it is the likelihood. And it has to reflect on how it has to have connection with the info slide. So you need to explain on how, because the info slide said A, then the likelihood, and you do have a logical explanation to that, B might happen. Okay, so that's what you should do if you have an info slide in your motions. And also request for clarification. Once debaters have seen the motion, you can request for clarification in the Zoom meeting. Usually CAP, all of us will give you time to read the motion first to understand the motion. And if you are confused, you can directly ask to the CAP. And please and be sure that if one person asks, all members of debaters and all speakers will be informed of the question and the answer for that question. Okay, we'll announce it in the broadcast in Zoom call. Okay, next. Okay, motion type. This House believes that this is basically a principal motion. Whether the principle is something that should happen, usually regardless of the feasibility. So this is a motions where you just need to prove whether something is justified, regardless of the feasibility. For example, this House believes that children don't have any positive moral obligation to their parents. Whether or not it's feasible to make children not having positive moral obligation in status quo, knowing how religious value works and how moral value works, you just need to show why as a children, you don't have any moral regulation to your parents, okay? But sometimes, even if it is only a justification, probably it is important to give a little bit of illustration of the debate in your setup or your definition, or probably a little bit of mechanism just to show in status quo how the world will look like, how the children will act when they don't have a moral obligation, for example. So you could have said in your setup, so what do we expect from children when they don't have moral obligation? We expect first children won't give, it's okay for children to not financially support their parents when they get old, for example. Second, it's okay for children to feel no emotional connection to their parents after he is graduating or after he is financially independent. So such things probably needs to be explained in your setup, just to make the debate clear, just for government team able to show on how your illustration about the motion will support your principle. Okay. Now, this House vote, usually feasibility of the policy is important to the success of the principle. Okay. For example, the motion this House would legalize drugs. Okay. Then you need to be able to make it feasible. How would you legalize drugs without harming all the people that consumes drugs? How government make sure that children won't access the drugs? So the feasibility is really important for this type of motion. This House SX would, I think I gave you examples before. For example, as SCT, for example, then this is basically an actor debates. All motions, all arguments should reflect on how this is justified for CT or this is justified for this X actor. This actor is, it could be an individual, it could be an institution, it could be a country, it could be a movement. Okay, so that's basically your argument will argue on how on behalf of the interest of the X. So if you do principle, why principally it is what X would feel, or if you want to talk about practical and benefit, you will argue why most likely this is what X would choose or would feel benefited from. Okay. Now, this house prefers a world where X, this is basically a comparison debate of status quo to hypothetical world where X is happen. Okay. This looks like this house prefers a world without revenge. Okay, so there is a world without revenge. So this is a hypothetical world. Hypothetical world is dunia yang nggak ada, yang nggak nyata, tapi hipotesisnya kira-kira gimana gitu. But bentuknya adalah hipotesis aja. It's not there, it's not in our reality, it's not in status quo. Dan bentuknya harus, and the form and the way you prove that should be in a form of comparison. Because most of the time, when debaters get this type of motions, the mistake that most debaters do, they only show why revenge is wrong. Okay, why revenge is bad, but that you don't compare why then in a world without revenge, conditions will be better, because people who do wants to get revenge is someone who have been hurt before. Then why in your world, if these individuals do not have any revenge as a mean to protect themselves or as a mean to get emotional satisfaction, then how they will survive, okay? On how they can get fairness in your world. So most of the time, debaters trap only explaining on how bad or how good is status quo. That's why you want how bad. Usually you trap on that how bad is status quo, but you forget to say then why in your world and this hypothetical world that you prefer, the condition will be better. Okay, and then also this house regrets act. This is basically quite the same with the prefers world, but you just regret something that exists in status quo. Again, you also compare the status quo to hypothetical world where X didn't happen. That's why in motion of regret, usually you do have an ideal condition. For example, this house regrets white lie. Okay, so you don't say why white lie only bad, but you're only set up. Usually you have then, if we don't have white lie, then what are the alternative to white lie? Okay, you should be able to make that particular comparison. Without comparison, then your arguments will only consist of negative case. You don't have any positive case at all. Okay, and then also this house celebrates, supports or rejects. It's basically a comparison of harms and benefit. It's easy to understand, and also it's this house believes that X does more harm than good. Now, this is basically when you have a motion, bring more harm than good, or the harm outweigh the benefit. Usually, debaters only focus on if you get the set where you should show that the harm is outweigh the benefit, then you will only argue about the harm without comparing what is the benefit. So in the motion of more harm than good, you are expected to say or to prove or to admit that there are certain level of benefit or good, but the harm is just higher. Or that's why you don't want to do the motion, okay, and vice versa. Okay, now next, dividing the motion. This is basically just to inform you on how the adjudicators expect you to define the motion, okay? And to prevent you to deliver an unfair definition. So the government must define the motion fairly and debatable. Types of unfair definition. This is basically squirreling. This is basically distorting the topic and defining it in a way that violates the spirit of the motions. If you did see the adjudicator's briefing, I think Judah mentioned it earlier. So, and also the example, it's already there. For example, this house would legalize drugs. This is basically should be drugs for entertainment, but then you divide it, this house would legalize drugs as in drugs that is basically still in an experimental stage. That's why it should be legalized, even if it's in experimental stage. Then that's basically another debate. That's the motion probably not saying legalize drug. Probably the motion would be a specific actor or specific patient should be granted the right to access experimental drug because it's beneficial for them, okay? But not the motion of this house would legalize drug. This allowing opposition to have a room of the debate, okay? Again, I'm using the same motion. Cannot be defined as drugs for medication that is administered by doctors or prescribed by doctors because it's happening in status quo. It's already legal. People use cocaine all the time to ensure anesthesia in the process of surgery, right? So this would make it impossible for opposition to debate, okay, to have a room of a debate. Refusing to debate the notion at the level of specific, the specific and the abstraction that the motion expect or requires, okay? So some motion requires specific or you can say that is basically the debate should extend and beyond of what regular definitions or regular things that happens in status quo. For example, this house would restrict civil liberties in the name of national security. The motion expect how individual rights of privacy or your informations, for your emails or everything or social media could be breached basically for national security, be it for terrorists to prevent terrorist attack or whatever other national security. But then the government choose to just restrict the debate into how everyone should be compulsory to have an ID or KTP. So it's not what the motion expected. That could also be an unfair definition. Place setting is basically narrowing the debate arbitrarily to specific places that is not specified by the motion. I think you can read the example. This house would ban commercial surrogacy, and then the government defined commercial surrogacy as in low-income nation where no alternative job exists and the country has been denied any form of international aid. So it's very, very specific. You can use this as an example, but not in general cases, because then government cannot define anything. And sometimes when you're being very specific on characterizing something in the motions, usually it doesn't seem feasible. Like, can you mention one country who was very, very poor and no one helped them at all? Like on our earth, for example. So that's basically, usually that's what happens if you define the motions unfairly. So, and also time setting, it's narrowing the debate arbitrarily to specific, similar with place setting. Time setting is basically you narrowing it into your into the timeline that you feel comfortable. For example, this house would impose import restriction or export restriction. Then you mention the countries that we should, for example, this house would supports import restriction policy, okay? And then you only mention that this is what happens in year of 40s, for example, where one country is successful to implement, and then you use all the study case only in this one country. And this is basically time setting, and it's only happened in that particular time where the Great Depression happened, for example. That's why it is basically the right kind of regulations to be implemented at that particular time. That's also a time setting. You cannot do that, and it's unfair. If this happens, then opposition team can do definitional challenge. Adjudicators and also probably the team not expecting any definition, won't expect any definitional challenge at all. Why? Because the debate usually in definitional challenge, the debate will not be dynamic because most team will just talk about their definition and why their definition is true. So there's a lack of engagement. But if yes, you want to do definitional challenge, this is what you can do. You can broaden the debate, you can explicitly challenge the definition, but still provide an even if arguments. Okay, so you still try to engage with the definitions being given by the government side of the house. Explicitly challenge the definition and debate only on those grounds. So you're not having an even if arguments. This is usually becoming a very undynamic debate. And hopefully no adjudicators will counter this type of debate in NSDC 2021. Okay, now if opposition team explicitly challenges the definition, they have to do it in their first speaker. So leader of opposition or first speaker negative have to do it, explain why the definition of the government team is illegitimate, and then provide an alternative and reasonable definition. Okay. So if you do have a different definition, you need to also prove why your definition is most likely not only true, but also fair, okay? Even in cases of bad definition, there is no obligation for opposition to challenge. Sometimes you are allowed to choose to proceed with the faulty definition because sometimes the faulty definition gives you so much benefit, okay? Debates are not automatically won or lost by definitional challenge, okay? Okay, now this is the role of the speaker for government and opposition. Okay, the Prime Minister creating setup and give fundamental arguments. The other speakers generally the role of the speaker, from first negative until third opposition is basically similar. You just need to clarify the debate. Probably the way to clarify from leader of opposition is different because you generally need to provide negation, team line and team split, and also provide major responses in forms of only A minus, and the form is basically an independent rebuttal. But in later speaker, second or third, government or opposition, it's pretty similar. You do clarification, you do responses, and you also somehow develop your arguments, your previous arguments. It's either you have a new extension as a second speaker, or in third speaker, you develop the previous analysis that's already there in your first and your second speaker, right? But generally, the role is basically giving responses, compare your responses, and then giving arguments, and then weighing the debate overall, right? But second and third speaker, you can do it so much in much more variative way because you can do it by using an independent rebuttal if you want to deliver your rebuttals, and then you do have extension, or you can do it in a form of clash, okay, or issues where you mix between your rebuttals and also your arguments, okay. So it's up to you as long as it's clear for the adjudicators. It's clear that it is an argument. It's clear that it's basically you're doing a new analysis from your previous points. It's also okay to do that, okay? But not for role of speaker. Third speaker is not allowed to bring a completely new method. And then also all substantive speeches must have signposting. This is the difference when you use Wsdc format, because all speakers should use signposting. What is signposting? Signposting is basically telling adjudicator what's your point. So you make a summary. First, I will deliver my argument first, and then second, what's the title of your argument? First, what is the title of your argument? And then second, what is the title of your second argument? Okay, and then you go to your first argument after that. So yeah, in Wsdc, it is not obligatory as per se it will affect your scores, but it is the way on how some adjudicators think that if you do not some adjudicators, generally in Wsdc, it has to be clear on your structure and everything, and your structure and your argument, and giving signposting, make your arguments and the entire speech just much more clearer That's why adjudicators notice on what do you want to prove on your speech earlier in the beginning of your speech, okay? So they don't have to wait until like 6 minutes and they know your extensions. So they overall know the flow of your speech from the beginning of your speech, okay? So reply speaker may be either the first or second, okay? The reply speaker are in reverse in order, so it's opposition first and then government. And then also neither reply speaker may introduce new part of team case, but reply speakers are allowed to bring new example, okay? But it is not an entirely new example from different ideas from what your first anterior third speaker already talked about. It has to have a similar analogy with the speakers with your substantive speech, okay? Okay, now we're going to talk about how becoming the prime minister. Okay, prime minister, this is basically what you should do as a prime minister. You should set an anatomy of affirmative case, and then you should create some arguments. So what is set up? Set up is basically consists of background, parameter, run of the debate, stance, timeline, and model. But before we start to talk about how to becoming prime minister, I think it's important to note that to be a prime minister, you don't have we don't really have a fixed or a rigid roles. This is only one of the way you can be a prime minister, and this is very basic. But most of the time, this will help you to develop from the basic, and then you learn how to be a prime minister that is much more advanced than this, okay? So right now we're going to talk about setup and then how to create arguments. So there are few elements in setup. It seems a lot that you have background and parameter and debate and then stance and then timeline, but actually the time allocation for setup maximum is only 1/3 from your total speech duration. So it's 7 minutes, it's probably only 2, max 8 minutes is probably 2.5 minutes, or it's only 2 minutes. In some cases, it's only 1 minute, even if it doesn't really needs if the motion doesn't needs a lot of explanation on the setup, then probably lesser than 1/3 from the total speech duration. Now, for the entire explanation on how you can be first speaker, prime minister, I will only have one example of motion, which is basically this house supports school voucher. And this is how I will show you also that even if this is a supports motion and this house will not, sometimes it's okay to prove and to show how the hypothetical world that you want to defend will looks like, okay? Or probably there is also do not be so rigid about the motion, because sometimes even if you have a briefing that motion A should be A, sometimes it's okay to use certain rules on the motion overlapping each other. Okay, so this house, even if it's not sounds like this house would do school vouchers and it's only this house supports school voucher, you still need visibility, you still need mechanism for these motions. Okay, so info slide, a school voucher are also called an educational voucher, and a voucher system is a certificate by the government. Okay, so you will only be given some certain amount of voucher and you can use it anywhere. Okay, any school, it's not only public school, it's also private school. Now next, assessing the motion. Assess the motion to establish the background of the case. Okay, this is what you should do. There's 3 important things. This attention to where the debate happens. Okay, so that's the example. And then problem identification. Describe, or second, you describe the status quo briefly. And then you do problem identification. Problem identification is actually identifying whom actor you want to protect in the debate, okay? So usually the problem is you want to have a lot of problem identification. For example, for this motion, you might want to solve about, oh, this is basically solving the poverty. This is basically, that's too much of a burden of proof. You should just focus on what is school voucher? What is the main problem most likely for school voucher? Okay, why student needs school voucher? So most of the time, problem of school voucher is where the student and parents have no choice at all but to put their children in this failing school. So you don't need to have a huge burden of proof that you want to solve poverty. It's really hard from school voucher. How could you solve the entire nation poverty system, which is the failure of the government system from your past government? Even the status quo government still also do corruption. So it's really hard, right? So be specific and just choose one strategic problem identification, okay? Now, this is to differentiate how backgrounds speech would look like, and this is how to differentiate between background speech of a beginner speech and also an advanced speech, okay? It consists of similar thing, but if you take a look at it, it's quite different, okay? Okay, this is the advanced speech because we do have an illustration of real example and matter, right? Now, after you create problem identification, you're creating parameter, okay? This basically motion should be defined as a whole. Parameter is basically definition, it's pretty much the same, okay? Parameter may contain a boundaries. This looks like the motion this house would legalize abortion. Probably you should put a parameter on how old is the pregnancy that government should allow abortion, because you also want to impose any harm for the mother if she aborts it in a later stage of her pregnancy, right? Because it will endanger their life. So that's basically could be a definitions too, okay? So this is the example of school voucher state-funded scholarship that allows students to attend private school. It's basically what's the info slide says, but I just want you to be clear on how you use parameter or definition, okay? Convert and already, this is basically arranging the room of the debate. This is just to make the debate clear. It's all okay for you to not have this, okay? Okay, convert an already identified problem into an active question of whether or not the room of the debate will be whether or not government should grant the right of each student to have a choice of a good education when public school already failed. And then try to make it slightly undebatable room of the debate. So you will have your stance. Your stance is basically yes. Okay, when you have a populist question like this, most likely the answer is yes, right? That's your stance. It's only to show that you support motions. Okay, but in a way that to frame the motion favorable to the government side of the house, okay? This is basically theme lines. Theme lines, usually there's a lot of theme lines. Justifiable, bring more harm than good. This is important because your theme line is basically your case in a nutshell, okay? When you have a justifiable, you probably have a different burden of proof when you have a theme line of urgency or bring more harm than good, okay? So it's important to choose theme line. What most likely becoming your theme line in certain motion. For school voucher motion, the appropriate theme line is basically urgency, okay? Because you want people have a choice, and from the argument, it is easier to show that the government have helped to provide sufficient education, okay? That's why they should give choices, and giving choices is important. If not, they're not answering the urgency of education. Government failed to answer the urgency of education, which is to empower poor society, right? Or middle class society, okay? Now, this is basically proposing a model. This is something that is important because sometimes you need mechanism or model. This is the only three things that you need to consider when you decide whether or not your motions need a model. Whether problem exists and status quo failed to solve. Most likely it is what happened. But the second thing is a comprehensive mechanism needed to avoid collateral damage, unnecessary or excessive implications that might harm the actor that you want to protect, okay? Or an effective model exists. For example, model must be clear and comprehensive, okay? Like this. I want you to take a look at the first, we will establish information, the third model of this. The mechanism for this house support school voucher, the third mechanism, we will establish information sources, such as website or information center that allow the public to access schools' academic performance and quality. This is basically the function of this number 2, is to prevent an excessive damage or collateral damage to the student that you want to protect, right? Why? Because if you don't allow the information sources, then how will people know that this private school is basically good? What if the private school only use marketing strategy, but they have a really bad academic performance, but they able to have a very good marketing and also marketing strategy, right? Then most people will be trapped in this marketing strategy, but they get a very bad educational system when they enter the university, for example, or when they enter the school, for example. So this is basically the function of this mechanism. That thing needs to be this type of things like problem access, whether problem access and status quo failed, and how you ensure the effectivity of your proposal, and how your proposal have a potential damage or harm to the actor that you want to protect, is important to think about in the case building and to be discussed in the case building, because sometimes you do need a comprehensive mechanism just to avoid unnecessary debate or to avoid any attack from your opponent. Okay, so your opponent cannot attack anymore on how people will not get good educations or will not get information, right? If you already mentioned that government will give the informations. Okay, now next is basically building an arguments. Okay, an argument should have array, A-R-E. Okay, a good argument should be linked back to motion. I'm sure most of you very familiar to this. It's basically RL, logic, link back, assertion, reasonings, example, link back. Okay, let's just take a look at one by one, because most of you trapped in the idea of how you make reasonings and how you make a complete arguments. Okay, a short and simple statement of what your argument is about. For example, this house would ban organized religion. So basically, organized religion is a religious body that have a structure. Okay, like church is an organized religion because they have a structure. They have pope, they have cardinals, and then they have cardinals. They have a system, right? They have a system in it. And also, mosque is also an organized religion because they have imam, and then they have a structure that divine and interpret the Bibles or Al-Quran, for example. So not everyone can interpret it. So there is a structure in it. Okay, now this is basically the assumption. Okay, assertion is this: organized religion inherently harmful for society. Most of you trap in thinking that when you say that organized religion is harmful, it is already an argument. That's why most of you like repeating it over and over again in your arguments without making any reasonings and making any example and a sufficient RL explanation. Okay, now this is basically reasoning. Okay, reasoning is the theoretical or logical explanation of how and why your argument is generally true. Okay, it's not only and how and why. Sometimes it's what, when, where. There's a lot of question from your assertion, derived from your assertion, okay? Like so be as practical as possible. That's why you need to be as practical as possible in explaining your chain of reason. Sometimes in explaining your chain of reason, you need to have a lot of reasoning. So reasoning is not only like another one sentence after you say assertion. No, it's not like that. So this is the example of how reasonings look like, okay? The first thing is that organized religion is premised on irrationality. You still need to prove what is irrationality, right? Okay, or how the irrationality will work in organized religion, okay? We think that democracy as a stance should ensure rational understanding. This is basically trying to picture on the context of why irrationality matter in this analysis and the reasonings, okay? But the most important thing in this is basically in this explanation is how, because we think that in the end of the day, religious believers who sign up to doctrines and organized religion, in the organized religion, are not able to ask the interpretation, okay? It's being the doctrines is from imam or pope, okay? And religion is actively encouraging people not to question. That's when, okay, through doctrines. So they explain doctrines first, and then what do doctrines do? Doctrines encouraging you not to question. That's why you don't have critical thinking. That's why it's harmful as an organized religion, right? So this is basically a chain of reasoning. And most of the time, you guys did not do it. You only give assertion, and then you think the assertion is good. It's probably good, but you don't have any reasonings. This is where you are trapped. Why didn't I get 70 or 71 or 72? Okay, why I get 68? So usually that's what happens. And also sometimes you need to give an example. Okay, it's data or statistic or simply analogy. Okay, what's rational example? What's happening daily basis, or a logical analogy can also, or a logical scenario is also an example. Okay, in this case, with using this household ban organized religion, most Catholic churches in Africa doctrines people not to use condom because it's a sin, while HIV/AIDS is an epidemic. Okay. So, and then you link back to the motion, or you link back to your main assertion. Okay. Now we think that democratic concern is not making sure that people made or bad or good decisions, but they need to have an informed choice, or an equally they equally know what is the positive and negative impact, and doctrines befriend them to do so. That's why government, as a government, can ban the motion. It can ban organized religion. Okay, this is what the arguments will look like. The entire argument will look like. And notice that this is only one layer of arguments in your entire argument. So for example, if you have one argument for this motion, this is only one layer. Now, notes on argument, okay? Identify your theme line, urgency, or justification correctly to create necessary arguments to fulfill your burden of proof. Second, separate different ideas inside one argument by creating layers in your argument. Layers is basically number 1, 2, 3, okay? Or ABC, whatever. It's just to differentiate. Don't mix different assertion and think that it was already a chain of reasoning. This is the second problem. Not only you have one assertion being repeated over and over again in your speech and you think it's already good, but then you have a lot of assertion in your argument and you think it's already a chain of reasoning. Turns out in only a chain of assertion, not a chain of reasoning, okay? So identify that you make an assertion, do not add it into another assertion, okay? This is what it looks like when you have an assertion, okay? Okay, we should do a school voucher because all people in Indonesia is poor and this will solve poverty, okay? And when you solve poverty, all people will be rich and Indonesia will be a developed country, not developing anywhere. When Indonesia becoming a developing country, we can have a project like NASA and we can fly people to the moon. Okay, that sounds a very good story. It can be followed, but it's all full of assertion. It's like a chain of assertion. First, you need to show why you don't show why school voucher will solve poverty, and then after poverty, suddenly Indonesia can become a developed nation, and then Indonesia can have a project of NASA. That's like a chain of assumption that's not only it's not, even if it sounds acceptable, but there's no process analysis at all into one assertion, from one assertion into another assertion. Okay, so most of you trapped in this particular chain of creating what we call is arguments that didn't prove anything. Okay, do not have any logical reasoning. Okay, layers will improve your structure and hence improving your manner. Okay, because in WSDC, clarity and manner is really important. If you did notice Judah's adjudication briefing, you have 40% manner, 50% more matter, and strategy. Okay, so this is the example when you create full layers. Okay, full layers in the urgency. We will still use the motions of this house vouchers. Okay, we'll discuss this one by one. This is layers 1. Okay, so in your motion, this house supports school voucher. Okay, first argument: why is it urgent to give school vouchers? Okay, usually if your burden of proof is urgency, then what you should do? What you should do in first layer is basically you answer what problems and harms in status quo that need a quick response from the government. Portray harms with data if necessary, or use logical domino effects of harm to make sure that the problem sounds really urgent or mendesak, or if it's not being solved quickly and there will be another harm and domino effect, not only in one actor but everyone, for example. But yes, it has to sound very, very feasible and logical. Okay, not too jumpy. Okay. The ultimate harms usually related to government's incapability to create best services to the society. So this is the example of first layer. Does it prove everything in the debate? No, most likely the first layer in urgency, if you want to mention problem identification, is not the main, or it's not something that will make you win in the debate. It's just to show how urgent it is, because most likely if you do urgency, then the opposition side of the house will accept your urgency, right? And the problem that you propose as a government team. Okay, we believe, now this is the example, we believe that the current public schools are failing, and then they have data, 28 students share a single computer, and then students are forced to practice in a halfway. Okay, how bad this public school is being portrayed in here. Okay, okay, now this is basically the second layer. Okay, second layer portrays structurally why status quo is not enough to solve the problem, usually by identifying failing actors in the debate and why most likely it's their inherent nature. That's why there's no other way. You should do our proposal, because the actors that should protect students, for example, which is the government, will never have the interest to change, or the public school will never have the interest to change. Now, 3 reasons why status quo will never have enough to solve the problem. Oh, sorry, there's only 2 reasons, okay? You can read, okay, the public school has no incentive to improve, okay? Because this is basically to prove why public school is not improving, because they all get fixed salary, okay? The funding is there anyway for the state. States doesn't look for profit and benefits, profit like private institutions. That's why most likely states only rely on the existing program and doesn't try to improve anything, for example. Or probably you can say that another reason is basically, even if the state is good, sometimes the state changing governments most of the time, all the time. Sometimes it is Trump, the government, who doesn't care about education, only care about the benefit of the top 1% in the United States, for example. Okay. Okay, and then B, you're not only talking about the public school, but also you're on the government system. You're talking about how the time and parents are not aware of the bad quality of public school because they live in a rural and district area, and they don't have any comparison. Okay, without the incentive of this, that they can choose, or the government in your mechanism start to inform them that there are a lot of schools and different quality, they might start to be aware, okay? And then third layer is usually an if layer, okay? It's predict the kind of harm that might be brought by your opponent, then analyze why your model and proposal will prevent the harm, or prove why in principle your proposal is more important to protect the victim, or whatever actors that you think more important in the debate, or whatever principle that you think is more important in the debate, okay? You can just read that. We do understand that students and parents might be an object of exploitation from private school, but why we think a school voucher is the best way to protect students? Our model ensures that students will always be informed, okay? Second, even if there is a potential of harm, justifiable to fix the public school, okay, then you're talking about, because the cost the public school is basically a lot of money, it is more effective to just transfer that choice to the children, okay? We believe, because the principle is that basically children should not use, because to transfer a public school, you might take 10 years or 5 years, and children will lose that particular time. That's why at least when you principally give them the rights to choose the schools, that might be better for them instead of waiting and unsure that the public school will improve anyway. This principle is a lot better than make the student wait for the public school to improve, okay? That would be one of the approach that you do. And this is basically the complete arguments, complete speech for this house supports, for the motion, this house supports school voucher, okay? Cool. Third layer. Okay. Now, I hope from this explanation of first government, you at least notice where you did wrong. It's hard to improve time by time. It's hard to improve like right away on making this type of arguments that not only an assertions or a chain of assertion, but also have a flow of burden of proof. But at least from this brief, you did notice that when you case build and your speech is basically consists of only assertion, you start to identify that. That's already a good step for you guys, okay? Now, this is basically for first opposition or leader of opposition, okay? Provide negation. Negation is the direct clash given by the opposition to the government stance, okay? No negation, no debate. It shows contexting issues, rooms of agreement or disagreement, okay? As an opposition, you can have a stance of proposal to status quo is enough to just stand on status quo, or you have a counter proposal, okay? It is the summary of opposition response and case. Now, this is what room of agreement looks like. We agree that students deserve a good quality of education and some public schools are failing, but we don't agree if the solution is by replacing public schools with school voucher. We believe status quo is enough to ensure the improved public education, and school voucher is not urgent, and giving choices will only harm to students' education, okay? This is how you provide negation. Of course, this is only basic. You can create negation whatever you see fit, but if you're still confused how to create negation, this is how you do it, okay? And then after that, building rebuttal. Rebuttal, apply similar principle. Just do an RL. Don't just do one layer analysis and they say this and then one rebuttal and then there's only one sentences without any reasoning, without any example, without any link back. Probably link back is not necessary, but at least you do have reasonings, okay? Cluster your rebuttals appropriately, provide signposting, okay? First rebuttal, second rebuttals, make layers, again, make layers in your rebuttal. Layers really help, guys, especially when you're struggling in English. Having 1, 2, 3, 4 will help your manner a lot, okay? Okay, this is rebuttal. A minus rebuttal is basically saying no to the opponent's premise, assume as A. So opponent's premise is the conclusion of their overall arguments, okay? And you can show an A minus or do an A minus by a lot of way, okay? You can take picture, is based on a flaw of evidence. I will give you later, I will give you example on how you do it. But this is to create rebuttal. Identify the strongest premise or main idea. Premise is basically the main idea of your opponent, and then make an N- rebuttal. And then make an even if rebuttal, even if basically you engage in the worst case scenario. This is how you do it. Always start your rebuttal by stating exactly what is your rebuttal and what is the premise of your opponents, okay? First rebuttal, they say blah, 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 blah. And then state clearly how many responses or rails you have to take down this argument. So 3 responses or 2 responses, okay? And then make layers in rebutting your arguments, your opponent's arguments, okay? First respond, blah, 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 blah. Second respond, blah, 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 okay? So make structure. And this is basically one of the example of how you can make a rebuttal, okay? A minus rebuttal. So we're going to rebut the motions of how this household ban organized religion, okay? They say religion doctrines people, so they cannot choose rationally, okay? This is the premise. The main idea is this, okay? A minus rebuttal is basically saying no to every premise or argument brought by your opponent by several strategy, okay? Escape from your opponent's parameter. Don't trust the characterization of your certain actor of system. So don't trust the characterization, right? They say that the characterization religion is basically doctrines people and the doctrines is really bad. Don't trust that, okay? So this is the way. No, that's not what happened. First rebuttal, 2 layers of rebuttal or 3 layers of rebuttal. A, in a vast majority of cases, religious doctrines help people to rationalize their evil urge as a human to be selfish, okay? That's why they teach them empathy and to give charity, okay? This is the example. That's why rich people willing to give 10% of their income to churches for charity purposes, okay? So the doctrines is not always bad. It's not always like putting irrational things. Most of the time, it's rationalize you because as an individual, most likely you are irrational because you are selfish, okay? You just want to have a lot of money, for example. Or this is the second approach of A minus rebuttal, okay? This is basically, but second, for example, that is your first A minus. This is second A minus. Irrational interpretation will also happen in your side of the house because there will always be people who is insecure over the existence of heaven and hell in status quo. So it's not mutually exclusive, okay? Extreme interpretation will always happen, okay? So they will always think that they will go to heaven if they make more sacrifice to God. They will still sacrifice their life in terrorist act in order to go to heaven. But for this type of A minus, usually you will answer in your argument why in your side of the house it is mutually exclusive, why in your side of the house it will be better managed, okay? So usually in your argument, you will say, it is better in our side of the house as the first speaker, but in my second speaker, you can just do issue and directly say why it's better on your side of the house, okay? It's better in your side of the house, in our side of the house, because at least in our side of the house, we have a top-down structure. So if the Pope say that we cannot be too aggressive anymore, that we cannot judge homosexuality as a sin, the followers will follow us. But if an individual interpretations, it's really hard to change that particular interpretations, okay? They already believe, okay? Okay, I have 5 minutes left. This is another example of A minus. You can read. Then this is even if a rebuttal is basically take the worst case scenario. And this is what you can do, have a manner drilling. Again, this briefing is mostly not definite tool. Search from another sources and practice make perfect. But before that, let me check. I have 1 minute left. Let me check the form for question. For Q&A system. Okay, I have one question from South Sulawesi. What's your opinion about PPKM regularly, specifically to our students to improve their ability in learning? Or what's the impact of PPKM? Okay, I don't think I can answer this question because probably it would be a motions. No kidding. I'm not gonna give a spoiler of what will be the motion for NSDC. But if you ask my opinion, I will just show you it's not my opinion, but what can you do if you cannot answer this question yourself? But what can you do and what type of question that you should ask yourself in order to be able to make a logical answer for this type of question, okay? So you have to show what are what is PPKM, how it looks like, and what's being restricted from PPKM. Okay, and then you have to answer also what is an ability of learning, especially in Indonesia, because PPKM is only in Indonesia. What is an ability of learning, and connect that to the general population of Indonesia. What needs to be improved? What are the condition of general populations in Indonesia, specifically in educations, and then why? What type of learning ability that needs to be improved from that particular characterizations of students? And then after you answer that, you have an answer what that okay, student in Indonesia is should I answer it or not? No. I want you guys to practice yourself. Okay, so you have characterization of student of Indonesia, and then you know from that characterization what is important, what is, let's just say, what is an important character from this characterization, what is an important skills that needs to be improved. Okay, and then after that, link that particular skills. How do you get these skills? Okay, how do you get these skills? Is it through some ways, A or B or C? Okay, and how PPKM influence this way, this A, B, or C, on how people will influence, whether A will support, PPKM will support that, or will give benefit or that, B, and C, what is it? And from that, you can answer whether or not PPKM is good for general students in Indonesia, or it's bad for general students in Indonesia. Okay, so sometimes if you want to answer the types of question that you are confused about in the debate, that's one of the way you can start practicing you can start practicing on step by step on how you should answer your initial question. Okay, just like that. Okay, what's the impact of PPKM? I don't even know whether it's good or not. Okay, for student. Okay, then characterizing, questioning what is PPKM, questioning what is the interest of student, questioning what is the ability, and then link that back again to your original question. Okay, probably that's what I could answer. That's what I can answer. Oh, cool. I have one more. Oh, I think this is the answer for adjudicators briefing. The test would look like you will be given videos, and then you should make verbal adjudications, and also you should fill the verbal adjudications why you give the winning to one particular side of the house, and then also you need to fill in the score sheet. Okay, we will give you the link also for score sheets, and we'll give you the link for the video also. Okay, and there might be an additional of written test, but we'll still on the discussion. We'll clarify later on the adjudicators briefing. Okay. Okay, I think that's all for the debaters briefing. After this, we will have technical briefing from Andre. Mutiara?
Thank you so much for the debaters briefing. I think that will end today for the debaters briefing. So I think everyone can just wait for the tech briefing now. Thank you.